Why should I believe that Jesus was resurrected?
Because
Excellent question. This is like almost the basis of my channel at this point. Why should I believe that Jesus was resurrected?
the historical evidence is that he really
It's
died and he really rose from the
medical
dead.
records, and I'll believe it. Okay, you show me Jesus Christ's medical chart, I'll buy into it. I'll be a Christian state.
All right. So that she's getting rather heated, which is a bit of a problem in a person-to-person exchange. There's definitely they're definitely going to be talking past each other. This is going to be posted online and has become popular, I think, largely because of the shouting match that this will become. But what she is trying to express, Mr. Pastor Cliffe Knechtle, I'm not sure if that's the word, how you pronounce it. Anyway, Pastor Cliffe, she is looking for something beyond the historical evidence that you've already been presenting, presumably up until this point. She's looking something beyond testimony, and she's giving an example. Hey, look, if there were medical records that I could look at, then I would have more confidence in this, and that would probably be enough for me to believe that he rose from the dead, because if we had before and after medical records. So, hey, whether that's a good answer or a bad answer, what she's trying to express is that she's looking for something beyond testimony as evidence. Reasonable, I think.
Man, they didn't keep medical records in the first century.
Oh, that's so convenient, isn't that? That's wonderful.
And this is not a terrible point in its own way, in that theoretically an all-knowing, all-powerful God had full control over when, in history, he would come and sacrifice his son for our sins. And because they seem to have a salvation plan that somehow covers people who lived before Jesus lived, and depending on who you are in your theology, that varies on how that exactly happens. When it happens is somewhat arbitrary. Now, I'm not arguing that an all-knowing, all-powerful God may not have done some kind of salvation calculus and determined that that first century point was the exact point that would maximize the most number of people accepting him and going to heaven. Hey, I'm a mere mortal. I don't know what all the variables are for that. But it is a good point, and it is very convenient that Jesus did all his miracles, and including this rising from the dead miracle, at a time when there was no way to verify it beyond testimony, which I think if you've been watching this channel, you will understand and know that testimony is always more likely to be someone lying or someone mistaken than someone telling the truth, or especially correctly attributing what happened to them to something divine or something way out of the ordinary. As David Hume says, the testimony for that would need to be so good that it would be more of a miracle that the person was mistaken than the miracle they're attempting to describe, right? So testimony, and we know that doesn't even bring in all like the faulty memory that we have, or the fact that we all perceive things. We're prone to visions. We're prone to misseeing and mishearing things. Just testimony is the worst possible kind of evidence to confirm a detail. I'm not disputing that that's the only kind we have from the first century. I think everyone in this conversation should just be agreeing, well, that sucks. That's too bad. Yes. And if it's not sufficient, that's not really on me. Jesus and God picked the time when it was going to happen. They could have picked a different time.
No, rather, it's real convenient for you to say, knowing full well they didn't keep medical records in the first century, it's so convenient for you to say, all right, if you give me the medical records, then I'll believe. Talk about convenient.
Now, I actually think the pastor has a point here as well. Because the type of evidence that she's putting forth as acceptable to her, it's impossible for this pastor or anyone outside of this woman, assuming she's a she. I'm just making an assumption here. If the person speaking may legitimately not be open to Christianity, and one way you could remain close to Christianity would be to set your bar so high that you just know that it can't be passed, and so you can walk around in a way and appear as if you're open, but not actually be open. And so I've recently been accused of something similar in some private conversations where I've been accused of I'm pretending to be open, but really I've set the bar so high that I can just braggadociously say that I'm open without actually being open. And yeah, you'd have to take my word for the fact that I am, absolutely. Unfortunately, there is no way from an external standpoint to tell the difference between what would we call a resistant non-believer or a non-resistant non-believer. However, that is actually unhelpful for the person trying to make the pitch that Jesus did rise from the dead, because either you're assuming that I'm completely resistant, or this person, this woman at the microphone is completely resistant, in which case you're just wasting your time, and why bother talking? Don't have the conversation then. If all non-believers are resistant, then the conversation doesn't matter. Or if I am resistant, or if I am non-resistant and am open to evidence, then you are stuck in a situation where you don't have sufficient evidence. Fundamentally, ultimately they're the same, and that's why, and we're going to talk about hell later, it's ultimately problematic because God could tell the difference between someone who's resistant and not resistant, but it seems like Christian doctrine says those people end up in the same place. Maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. We will get to that later, but for now, back to the shouting.
Ray, come on, man, let's be honest. How convenient of you to say, unless we have it on Polaroid film. I can't believe it. No.
So again, that would be, he's doing a reductio ad absurdum. He is putting words into her mouth that she didn't say, but he's just sort of extrapolating where this line of thinking could go, and actually even specifying a brand of film. Oh, it would have to be, can't just be on film. It would have to be on Polaroid film, a specific brand of film or whatever. And again, yeah, that would be ludicrous for her to say. She didn't actually say that. What she said was medical records. Now, theoretically, there are types of medical records from the first century. Unfortunately, they would fall under the category what we would probably just call testimony. Anyway, that's a real aside that just popped into my head. Sorry about that. The point is, if you are a non-resistant non-believer, as I continue to search myself and believe that I am, what I need to say is something more honest is I don't know what type of evidence it would take for God to convince me, but God knows, and God is choosing not to supply that. I think if I do set an arbitrary standard, like it would need to be on Polaroid film, not even a different brand of film, it needs to be on Polaroid film, well, yes, then I'm obviously setting up Christianity to fail. So this is a fine line. This is a more nuanced conversation. Unfortunately, there's two very heated individuals in this conversation who are yelling at each other. And ultimately, I mean, this got millions of views on TikTok, so maybe shouting is the way to go. But I'm not sure they resolve much.
Full well, they didn't have Polaroid film in the first century. How convenient of you to say, well, show me the medical records from NYU Hospital, and then I'll believe Jesus rose from the dead, knowing full well NYU Hospital did not exist in the first century.
So, by continuing on that reducto, he is basically now becoming performative for those who are on his side. He's now trying to demonstrate, well, look, anyone who doesn't accept my conclusion is just unreasonable. He has moved it away from acknowledging or trying to steelman her and saying, well, this might be a reasonable objection, to now just casting it aside and said, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but that everyone who disagrees with me is just as a category unreasonable. And that is not the best way, again, to communicate things. It is a good way if you are merely looking to to look good in front of those who already agree with you. Sure, good strategy.
Come on, man. Homer, Herodotus, Sophocles, Plato, Aristotle. Show me the medical records for them, will you? Historical knowledge is not based on medical records, ma'am.
So those, again, none of the claims that what they're making, those historical figures that he just listed off there, Aristotle, Heraclides, all those people, is not that the woman wasn't saying, hey, Jesus didn't live. She is disputing the resurrection claim. So you are not putting forth an analogous historical example, my friend, Pastor Cliffe.
Based on the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony.
And actually, we go beyond eyewitness testimony for some of those figures. For example, just their mere existence, some of them ended up on coins. Some of them ended up in statues. Of course, you can put fictional characters on coins, and you can make statues of fictional people. But in terms of like legal tender, that was less of a thing, and it may not be conclusive evidence, but at least there are some handful of things beyond just mere testimony of the existence of people. And I actually had someone early in my deconversion stage throw out at me rather almost as angrily as this person. So if there were coins with Jesus' face on them, you'd believe in Jesus? That would have been weird, and I get that if I had been saying, no, I need Jesus coins to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that would have been an unexpected piece of evidence, because Jesus' ministry was not about minting coins, about power, about officially having that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, that would have been an example of bad standard. I didn't put it forth. I was just merely showing there are even back then possible ways to have maybe not great evidence, but at least some evidence that isn't entirely testimony.
Eyewitnesses is that Herodotus and Aristotle and Cicero and Virgil really lived. They're not just figments of people's fertile imagination. And the historical evidence is that Jesus really lived, really died and really rose from the dead. And eyewitnesses saw him risen from the dead. And they wrote what they saw. That's historical knowledge.
Okay, that was the end of it. So the one bad, he shouldn't have used, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Herodotus in his examples, because Herodotus was a historian who included in his details about Roman history portents, and he talked about certain battles involving the gods, and they would pray to the gods, and the gods would come and interact with them and intermingle with them. I'm not a historian, so I'm not remembering all the details exactly, but Herodotus was an example of someone whose works are taken piece by piece because they include supernatural elements that, oh, and if I remember correctly, he included a griffin that he joined in battle by the griffin, if you remember. Those are, I believe, the half bird, half horse creatures. Those were in the battles that he was describing. So again, we actually do look at someone like Herodotus and say, hey, well, okay, maybe he's right about some of these details, like cities or battles or whatever. And maybe on some of the supernatural details, he's not correct. We treat history, bit of a theme for me of late. We don't treat these documents as a homogeneous true or false, but we look at all historical documents on a claim by claim, we look at each proposal that they're putting forth separately and individually and see how they come up. Now, of course, we do look at general reliability to estimate how they're looking, what they're doing. But again, we don't just, this pastor, as others seem to be very upset that we don't treat the Bible as uniformly true and making these weird claims that we treat other history in a homogeneous way, and we certainly do not. All right, so that was a shouting match in the street from a believer and a non-believer, Pastor Cliffe. Pastor Cliffe. Let me know in the comments, was that a useful conversation, a not useful conversation? Where do we go from here?